and get us started. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Van Dorn. I'm the president and CEO of the Pleasanton Chamber of Commerce. I'm really pleased to welcome you to our 2025 forum for October. We have a great set of speakers today. I'm so pleased that they could join us. For some time now, I've been interested in scheduling something like this, so I'm really happy it came together, and it couldn't have happened without Roy Cook's help and Robert Half's support. So thank you, Roy, very much. And of course, all the speakers that are here, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Just a second, I've got a lot of folks coming in here. Okay. What we're planning to do here is talk about inclusion, diversity, and equity. And then before I get into that, I just want to make sure everybody understands what these forums are about. We call them our 2025 forums, where we review and look at the goals that we set as a chamber. We put together a vision document called our 2025 vision for the community and for the business community as well. And so we look at those major goals and invite speakers to talk about things that are important to us. And this is certainly a very important issue that we want to talk about today. So if you haven't taken a look at our vision document, I'll try to enter that into the chat today. Also, if you have questions for any of the panelists, which we will take questions at the end of the presentation, please put them in the chat. I'll monitor it the best I can. And if I don't catch you, just raise your hand. Or Brad Hurst, as he usually does, he'll just interrupt and ask a question. But I really appreciate you all being here. So as I mentioned, we've got some excellent colleagues that this is what they do for a living. So we're going to hear some great perspectives, not only from large businesses, but hopefully from the small business community, so they can take back some great tips on how they can boost up their inclusion and diversity programs. And, at the Chamber, we do recognize that diverse issues are very important to our community. And so we're really happy to, again, bring this to you. I would, again, like to thank everybody for being here. And again, I would want to thank Robert Half for their help and assistance. And I'd like to hand this off to our moderator, Lise Edwards from Robert Half. So Lise, thank you for being here, and the show is yours.
The show, okay, well, I'm on. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Steve. And I'm really excited. It's a little early, but I'm excited to be here this morning as a part of the chamber. As you mentioned, this is our line of work, but more importantly for me, it's really been a calling. It's a passion. It's something that I've been doing in this space, inclusion and diversity. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in this space of diversity, inclusion, inclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity, inclusion, belonging. So I share that with you because it's been an evolution, and this work and really paying attention to it in organizations, our companies, and with our teams is about 15 to 20 years steeped in most companies that have been doing this, for a good amount of time, with the exception to an IBM who's been doing it 50 plus years. My background is primarily in technology here in the Bay Area. I'm probably one of the oldest Valley girls in HR here. And I've had the opportunity to work with some really amazing Fortune 100, 500 companies, EMC, VMware, Oracle, Genentech, Salesforce, and now Robert Half. So a very vast opportunity within technology and growing, and I've seen a lot of change, and it continues to change. But more importantly, at Robert Half, I'd like to just share with all of you just briefly that our focus is really, is I would say, a focus around initiative that leads with inclusion. For all of you that understand inclusion, it's so important for our workplaces to create a space where people can feel safe, where they matter, where they value, They're valued. An ecosystem, right? Taking a systemic approach and leveraging diversity in all of its forms, not just ethnicity. It's how we want all of us to be able to feel safe and show up and bring our whole selves to work. And there's a lot underneath it. We lead with 5 pillars around recruiting, community outreach, culture and environment, and most importantly, making sure that our leaders, our employees, our allies are coming from the same level playing field where they understand the language in this space. So a lot of support and development is threaded throughout the tapestry that we're weaving at Robert Half in this space. I'm a leader, I'm a guide. It's not my initiative. It's all of our initiative at Robert Half. It's a global initiative. So what plays a huge role in that, with I'm sure some of your companies as well, is a global lens. I mean, it goes without saying that all that we do, whether we're a local operation, whatever industry we're in, I think we all are we're seeing that the world is a very different place today. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the killing of George Floyd has really opened up, I think, the aperture for many to pay attention to racial and ethnic diversity and social injustice. We're going to talk today about, how COVID has played a role as well and continues to play a role in our workplace and with our workforce and our marketplace as well. So with that being said, I think it's more important that we're going to hear from some really amazing leaders in your community. I had the opportunity to meet with a few of them yesterday. Debra Gil, who's the Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations at the City of Pleasanton. Jennifer Cantero, Director of Marketing and Sustainability at Sensiba San Filippo. As well as Gustavo. We missed you yesterday, but that was on us. And I'm excited to get to know you and hear from you today. Gustavo Santoya, Global Manager, Diversity and Inclusion Communications with Chevron. So with that being said, what I'd like to do is start the conversation, because when it comes down to it, it really is about the conversation. It's about the opportunity to listen for all of us, to learn today, and to really start taking a lead into action. And so with that, we're going to hear a lot about best practices, learnings and tips and progress along the way as well. So we hope to also carve out some time at the end of the panel. We talked about that yesterday because we know lots of you are doing some amazing work too. And we want to have that conversation and give you the opportunity to share out some of the things that you have experienced in your journey of inclusion and diversity. So with that, I would like to start by each of the panelists. So let's start with you, Debra, in sharing a little bit about yourself, your role at your company, and then we'll get into some of the dialogue, some of the questions that we socialized yesterday and really learned a lot about from each other. So Debra, if you would, please. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here. Well, I've been with the City of Pleasanton. It's going on 21 years in March. I've been in the HR field for roughly 27, 28 years. In my capacity now, I'm responsible for all of the pay and compensation, the recruitment and retention for the organization, workers' compensation. I serve as chief negotiator for all of our bargaining contracts for our with labor relations. I handle all the harassment and discrimination complaints, DFEH complaints, employee engagement, and currently serve as the health and safety officer for the city's Emergency Operations Center response for COVID-19. The D&I initiative comes under the umbrella of all things employee related, and I have been happy to be working on that initiative for the past several years for the city.
Great. You have loads on your plate. So thank you for being here this morning. Jennifer, if you would please share with us, Jennifer Cantero.
Sure. I've been with Sensiba San Filippo for almost 9 years now, and in marketing for over 20 years. And within the past few, I've branched out into sustainability And what falls under that is diversity, equity, inclusion. And so I've been doing a lot of work with my fellow colleagues here at Sensiba for the past 3 years, digging into how we can breathe diversity, equity, inclusion within all of our policies, procedures, and processes.
Great. Thank you for that. And Gustavo, welcome. Good morning. You may be on mute, Gustavo. It's down in the left-hand corner. You just have to click on.
He's got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys, can you hear me now?
Yep,
Yes,
there
sir.
you are, Gustavo. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning to you, and thank you very much. I want to thank the Chamber, Steve, and everyone here for inviting me to the panel. This is a very exciting moment for me because when I see Herb Ritter's the Pleasanton sign over his shoulder, I have to say 20 years ago, we were looking for a place to live. We were living in San Jose, and we looked all over the peninsula and everywhere, and somebody I worked with down in San Jose, hey, you should check out Pleasanton. The minute I saw that sign, I said, we're living here. We are living in Pleasanton. And so I've had the good fortune of living here in this wonderful city for 20 years. I have to say it's been the best decision of my life because of not only the schools, the environment, and the work that the Chamber has done to really make that downtown area a special place, and not just the downtown area, but all of Pleasanton. I have to say, I've talked to folks who have lived here much longer than I have, and they say it wasn't always that way. And so really kudos to all of you for the hard work that you've done to make this a wonderful place. And I have to say, I have relatives from all over the world who have come to Pleasanton and said, and spread the gospel of Pleasanton to places like Belgium and France and Scotland and Europe because
Wow.
they love this little town. So I just want to put that out there and thank you. Quickly about myself, I'm a former journalist. I actually started way back when as a sports reporter. I used to do contract writing for the Washington Post. I covered the Dodgers and the Lakers on the West Coast, went into newspapers, became a reporter, a city editor. I've had the great fortune of interviewing 2 US presidents. I've been to the Playboy Mansion. I interviewed David Hasselhoff once on Baywatch, and he put me as an extra in one of his episodes. So I've had a great little career. But this, once I had my daughter, I couldn't live that life anymore. So I went into PR, ended up becoming a VP for a big PR firm in the city. And then by good fortune, I came to Chevron and I met Nathan Ritter. And it's been a great partnership ever since. For the last 15 years, he's been a wonderful friend and someone that I really just admire immensely. And I'm glad that he, chimed me in for this opportunity. And through that, I've known Janine and Herb and folks like that. We've been in the city and I'm very invested in Pleasanton. I've worked in the D&I space for about 8 years at Chevron. Before that, I did, corporate media relations. I've done internal communications, executive communications for the top officers, a lot of it having to do with diversity inclusion. So I'm looking forward to this discussion because I really want to share and have the dialogue with you to make sure that we are all trying to, figure this thing out because it isn't easy.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What a cool career. I'd love to learn more about when you talk Lakers and Dodgers. Okay, you're up my alley now. That's really, so as you can see, we have a very diverse panel coming from different industries, right? Different exposures and experiences. So with that, let's get into it. And we're going to talk about your company culture. All right. So yesterday we had the opportunity, Debra, to really better understand, because your plate is full. You're in more of a government focused environment. However, loads of what you're doing, we're all learning from, especially during this time with COVID and remote work and socializing reentry. Some of us, we talked about this yesterday, some of us are in the offices and some of us will not be in the offices. We'll hear a little bit about that from Jennifer when they plan on coming back as well. And some of us are just, we kind of like where we are, right? Home is our new workplace and our workplace is our home, or out of our car, or wherever we could be. So with that, I'd like to hear from each one of you, if you would, and conversation-wise as well, is what are you doing within your companies at a very high level, if you will, because it can get pretty deep, about inclusion and diversity within your initiatives, your strategy, Do you lead with diversity? Do you lead with inclusion? Tell us more about equity. We're hearing equity, as well as E can stand for equality. Oh, and by the way, the new one is JEDI, justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion. So as I started off, this is an evolution. So let's talk about the terms you're playing with, the culture that it's starting to move in a progressive and a 21st century direction. So Debra, let's start with you, please.
Sure. Well, our organization has obviously, many of us have been compliance focused for a long time, and that's affectionately known as AB 1825 training. How not to get in trouble is basically what that is.
Right.
This isn't entirely different. This is really looking at inequities that were put in place long ago, particularly for government organizations that impact a great number of people, particularly race-based, in an inequity that maintains over time. And so organizationally, what we've started with is normalizing. So in terms of strategy, we have three main pillars. They come from GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. They are normalize, organize, and operationalize. And so in normalize, it's really coming to a common understanding of those systems of race that have been and what has happened historically, and where has government, local government, all the way to the federal government, where has the roles been played, and how has that brought us to where we are today? Because you can't really dismantle something you don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
So we have gone through, we've started with an educational process of our executive team to learn common language and understand that history, to be able to start having dialogue about some meaningful change in local government. And so that was facilitated by a D&I expert, Karen Fleshman. She's with Racy Conversations is the name of her company. So she's a subject matter expert and hosted 4 workshops last year with our executive team to talk about that and have some really meaningful dialogue. It's a vulnerable thing to ask people to come into a room and start talking about race if your history has been, everybody's told you don't talk about race. And now it's like, everybody get together, let's talk about race. And so I do think that it's important to have subject matter experts leading the conversation and providing that space that you're talking about so that people can have an open dialogue about what that is. There's often a fear of saying the wrong thing or coming across as racist or gosh, this is just so uncomfortable because I've never had to do it before. And so the executive team took on that under the normalization process. In terms of moving forward in the second pillar, which is organize, that's about building capacity in our organization and creating some subject matter experts that span the entire organization at every level, in every department, that can help inform decisions, policies, programs, those types of things, but it's really bringing people up to speed and normalizing the conversation by basically building capacity. And then operationalize. Operationalize is about taking some racial equity tools in general, and putting them as a transparency against the programs and the practices that we have in the organization, to see if there are any, we have things that have been unintentionally perpetuating racial inequity. That could be for a local government agency, internal to the organization, or externally in terms of public policy. So those are the 3 main things. And incorporated in that, we have, as chief negotiator, I have negotiated in our general labor contract some training, and the union was very, this is our AFSCME union, PCA, and they were happy to sign on to diversity inclusion training and thought it was a great idea, as was our Police Officers Association. Early this year, before any of the demonstrations, before any of that came on, we had actually negotiated that in their agreement as well. again, really well received by the organization. So in terms of those types of trainings with our bargaining units, and we'll continue on like that with our strategy. So it's very much a systemic approach to our organization for D&I. It's going to take everybody, as you alluded to.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing out and breaking out, because I think it really helps us because it is so big, right? And when we can consume it a little bit better and lay it out in bite size, whether it's governmental, I mean, when we talk about normalize, organize, operationalize, that's pretty easy to apply, right? In all of our, however big, organizations, teams, companies. So I think that's really great. I do want to just share out with those that are on the call and attending. You gave some great resources. We will be bundling those resources. We talked to Steve yesterday. We will be, whether it's in the chat today or after our call today, Steve will be rolling these up for all of you in an email. We chock full of great resources and tools that Jennifer and Gustavo and myself from Robert Half and Debra will be sharing. So you're going to hear more and more about those. And I think those are going to really help all of us.
I will add on something that you just said. You know, sometimes it is so big that it's hard to understand where to even start. Like, wow, we haven't done much and I don't know where to start. And it is very much data driven. That's where you really can inform yourself about where you are. So if you have no data on the demographics of your workforce, we're service based, so obviously it would be the public, but maybe it's your customers, maybe it's the people that you service. Actually pulling data and understanding where you are is really a good first step in formulating where you're trying to go and then be able to measure it.
I absolutely agree. I think knowing what's in your own backyard, be it numbers. Now, I would also say numbers don't tell the whole story. However, they do add to the nuance and the understanding of where you are, where you may want to go as well. Because many of us, over 50 employees, need to comply here in the United States. So I think that's a great call out. In addition to that work you put in, measurements as well, right? How will you know if you're progressing or not? Because we need to be agile in this space. So I really appreciate that. It's a really good call out. Hey, Jennifer, how about you? You shared yesterday some work that you're doing also within your space, similar, but yet different.
Yeah. So first off, I love to echo Debra's point about, pulling your data and seeing where you're starting from. That's a great first step. I also would like to point out that another good first step is for folks to do your own self-work first. If you're somebody who's going to be leading the charge in your organization, it's really important to figure out where your own unconscious biases lay and where, you might be a little bit racist. Debra had a great quote, which I wrote down. It says, you can't dismantle what you don't understand. And, you can't look at your organization with a clear lens unless you've done the work yourself. And you can't facilitate discussions with other folks, like listening sessions and roundtables, unless you have fully done the work yourself and you understand where you stand and can facilitate in a non-emotional way, right? Because you need to be able to help everyone through their own internal struggles and feelings about all of the issues, because it's uncomfortable, and it's time that we need to start getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? At Sensiba San Filippo, we started tackling diversity, equity, inclusion back when we became a certified B Corp in 2018. And that was just a toe in the water for us. And we really started to dig more into it. And in the last half of 2019, we tend to try to focus on a theme each year to try to tackle and move our needle forward in certain areas. And so for 2020, we actually had already said that we were going to do diversity, equity, and inclusion. And John Sensba, our managing partner, actually signed the CEO Action Pledge for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that PwC is is hosting. And we did that back in 2019 and started to get the wheels turning, and things like listening sessions and roundtables with our employees in small groups. And of course, we all had to do it through Zoom because we were all at the time socially distanced. We've held book clubs so that everyone can be reading books and discussing similar things and similar concepts that we all have a baseline understanding of, like microaggressions and intersectionality and the difference between equality and equity, right? Because it's not the same, it's very different. So we've been doing a lot of work along those lines. We're hopefully going to be rolling out some mandatory training for all employees very soon. We're actually doing a demo today for a software tool that helps companies measure their diversity, equity, inclusion through surveying the employees and things called Ascending. And so we're very excited about that tool. But yeah, tackling a lot of different things within our organization.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I so appreciate, we spoke yesterday about getting to know your own self. Where are you in your own journey? And I think that is key. Many of us, as we're on this call and we're in the Bay Area, working in these companies, we look around and we're all struggling with ensuring there's more diversity within our workplace so that we can be exposed and share best practices and learn perspectives and thoughts. And I think it's important for us to understand, for myself, my own white privilege. I think it's important to understand what this means, but don't take that as face value, because you may not know what's underneath or behind me or with me, is who's my family, where is my come from, right? So not just looking at folks as to the color of their skin, their tone in their voice, what all this is about. I think that's incredibly important. So thank you very much. And I think we have loads of tools that we'll be offering up in that space as well. And I'm glad you mentioned the difference between equality and equity. I'd really encourage folks when we put that out there to school themselves on that space as well. Gustavo, you have such a vast experience and around language and communications, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's essential and imperative to the work in the IND, DEI, D&I space. So I'd love to hear really what your role and how you're playing and leading in this space. I mean, you work for a huge company,
Yes,
right?
very big. Yes.
So how are you and how is Chevron leading the way in a lot of this? Because I know I've been working with them for years and years in this space. So curious about the involvement and evolution.
Well, we are in the midst of a massive evolution, as you can imagine, Lise. There's so much that is going on, especially just in the last, since March. And I know most people want to throw 2020 away, and I'm with most other folks because of what's happened. But I think the silver lining, if you want to call it that, is that it's really uncovered and brought to reality some of the hardcore issues that we've had to face, especially when it comes to things like, equality and equity and all the other things that you mentioned. I want to go back to your original statement about, what does it mean? What does diversity inclusion mean? And I have to admit that I remember like 2 years ago having a conversation on what the difference is between equality and equity. And we just couldn't figure it out. Since then, it comes to this, is that, there's a saying that goes, diversity is a fact and inclusion is an act, meaning that the fact is the math doesn't lie. Here's how many folks you have of each category. That's the data. Those are the numbers, right? The act part is the part of inclusion. Of course, it's sort of, what are we doing to make sure that we make everyone comfortable and inclusive? So, for example, another saying that I know many of you may or may not know is from Peter Drucker, the management consultant, that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning that, culture can be everything. You have to have the ability for folks to be able to express ideas and feel that what we see a lot now, the psychological safety to express those ideas without feeling that it's going to be impacting either your career, your business, and whatnot. At Chevron, you can imagine that we've had a very old school culture. It's an 140-year-old company, right? It's in the Fortune top 20. You're talking about, its roots are in wildcatting and very male dominated. And it's very much, old boys, old school mentality. And so that's kind of deeply rooted. So breaking those roots is a long process. And Chevron has done a great job. 25 years ago, when they started to make their corporate values, they had the foresight to realize that diversity was going to be important. You need to get all these ideas in your company. So they put it as one of our first 7 values. And now we've pared those down, and diversity inclusion is our top value. And I think that the reason it is because we realize that whether you're a big company like ours or even a small company, you have to be able to look at problems and solve them, but solve them in a way where you're having every perspective. I mean, if you're looking at a situation, I know, and you all think the same, you're not going to be able maybe to solve the problem as if you get somebody from other perspectives. So I think that allowing a culture and building a culture that allows you to, hey, I want to say something without being able to, impact my career, potentially get fired, potentially piss everyone off, I think is critical to have that ability to create a culture like that is as important as anything when it comes to diversity inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, 140 years, that's a tough nut, and I think it's really important that people like yourself do feel, and I think the term you used was psychological safety. I think that's very, very important when people understand what safety can lead to, right? It opens doors to collaboration, the innovation, the creativity, where we not only feel safe, that we matter, right? And so I absolutely appreciate that focus. I'd like to shift a bit, and I'll use the word pivot, if you will. Inclusion and diversity in and of itself, and an inclusive systemic approach and how we're doing our work. All of you have mentioned the various ways you're doing that. How has this pandemic, really, and you mentioned a little bit about it, Gustavo, so I'm going to let you lead with this, so then we'll circle on back. Shifted the thinking of your company. What surprised you most? I mean, you're working with folks that have been, I know tenure at Chevron can be tenured.
Yes.
But at the same time, what are those things that you, and I'm going to twofold, I'm looking at my notes, has surprised you most, as well as how have you engaged then your remote workforce? What are the things that you're doing to ensure that when we talk about inclusivity, really it leads to employee engagement, right? So what are some of those things that you may want to share out and you've learned that are working, and maybe some that aren't working so well, and maybe that will spark some conversation as well with our audience as well.
Sure. No, I think that it's been obviously the convergence of the pandemic, along with the issues around George Floyd, Aubrey Audrey, all those have really kind of crystallized and made us just work differently. I think before all this happened, you had a leadership that was very old school. In fact, a lot of the leaders, like some of them, you have to be present and accounted for in the office. You have to have your door open. Leave at 9, get in at 9, leave at 5. And this forced them to change their way of thinking. They had no choice. The virus doesn't care what position you're in, right? And so now it took a long time, but now they're like, wow, travel costs are down. We can have meetings. We're more agile is a big term now that's being used. And I think that to me is seeing our leaders have that aha moment, go, wait a second, why do I have to travel around the world when I can talk to you? Now there's a value to face-to-face, no doubt. And when we get back to that, there will be, but it's definitely a different world now. So I would say that is a big change. The other change I want to say is that when we talk about diversity, it's not, like you said earlier, it's not just about what we look like, visible diversity. I mean, there's a lot of non-visible diversity. In SPACA, I work a lot with, I have a daughter with with autism and an adult daughter with autism. And I do want to do a shout out to Janina and the work they're doing at Sunflower Hill. It's amazing stuff. What they're doing there, shout out to them. Yes. But I would say that like 90% of disabilities are non-visible, right? So you don't know how people are doing. And so when it looks like, what can they bring to the table? Where I'm seeing more and more folks with these disabilities starting to come out. Let's talk about extrovert versus introvert. Extroverts are having a hard time in this space. Now, I consider myself a social introvert. So I'm the kind of guy who I can, speak to folks now, but I need to recharge. I need my alone time. I need to be able to read a book. My wife, on the other hand, is an extrovert. And so she, gains her energy being around others. This has been a tough time. But for the introverts, I've talked to so many at our office who are saying, listen, this environment we're in has allowed them to flourish, to speak more, to do things that they weren't able to do before. And I think that is what the whole idea of getting those ideas, bringing people out, getting more folks together is critically important. And so I think I have to say that even though 2020 has been you want to say it's a throwaway year, this is probably the most important year in my 15-year career. And I've been doing this work for about 8 years in D&I, most important in my career that I've ever seen, because you're seeing a complete shift in how companies, leaders, folks see the importance that at Ford we used to talk about a lot. I mean, you've been doing this a while too. You used to talk a lot about, and yeah, people did it, but now you're like, we have to do it. There is no choice. And that's what's critical about this. And that's what's so great about what we're doing. And the pandemic has really made people think differently.
Yeah, I so appreciate you bringing up, it is National Disability Month, and neurodiversity is finally getting its justice, I think. People are better understanding. When we're talking about some of these terms, I would also offer up for our attendees to look into neurodiversity and how it shows up or doesn't. And I think, to your point with remote working, I would say that this is a great environment for those that are challenged and have been in the workplace with neurodiversity, as be it autism, ADHD, right? Because they are able to feel safe when maybe we haven't created an environment for them where they can shine, right? So I absolutely agree with you, and I think we're getting more out of people, and people are becoming more aware. I agree with the silver lining as well, and I'd love to hear you. We talked a little bit about this. You totally opened the door. You must have been channeling Gustavo. Yesterday we talked about feelings, right? We talked about depression, mental health during this time. So Jennifer and Debra, I'm gonna throw it back to both of you. Jennifer, let's talk about that employee engagement into this space where Gustavo is sharing with us what you can't see, right? And how and what we could be doing to ensure that we're creating that inclusive environment, as well as those things that you're doing. I don't want to mean to take away from the original question, but I think we just stepped into a space I think is very important. Jennifer.
Right. Thank you. It is, there are so many different feelings going on right now, and people are in so many different places. We have certain folks that are thriving in this environment, but then we have individuals who, we have some staff that are single, and they're in, an apartment with roommates, and they're basically sequestered into their bedrooms and without a real desk to work on, and they're sitting on their bed working on their laptop, and they're very closed off. And and individuals who are going through this, the world's on fire right now.
Yeah.
Right. The literally, figuratively, and
I was going to say in more ways than one. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, we've got people that are having to evacuate from their homes, and we've got people whose emotions are running so raw with the social injustice and all of the things that are coming at us through social media and on the TV and the news. Creating a safe and brave space for those individuals, providing, if you have, an employee assistance program, providing that information to your employees, or just carving out a safe space, carving out a place just to listen to your employees, and thinking about your own staff that you manage one-on-one, and reaching out, and instead of going, do you have your work done, go, how are you doing, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
How is all of the things of 2020 affecting you?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And just listening, not responding, just listening, and and asking them, how is this making you feel, how's you know and just telling them, I hear you. Sometimes people just need to be heard, and just creating a space for that, and having open discussions. And I think right
Absolutely.
now COVID has really made us a lot more empathetic
Mm-hmm.
as a society, I believe. And so we're so open and so raw right now that we're experiencing everything on a much higher scale than we probably normally would.
Yeah.
And just being aware of that and being kind, as John says, got to be kind to one another. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that empathy is huge. I mean, it's one of the top competencies for an inclusive leader. And that listening is so important. Not to mention many of us that have children that we're schooling at home. In between all of what else we're doing, I don't know about you, I've gotten more emails and meetings on my calendar than I've ever had, right? I think we do it to ourselves, right? The day is into the night, and the night is into the day. So I think you bring up some very good points. Debra, I'm going to do this to you because I want to leave some time. I want you, if you could answer the question, but I'm also going to throw out as our final question, as we start thinking about, should we return to work? And before I throw it to you, Jennifer, I want you to share out, because I thought all of us might get a kind of feel like, oh no, you're right. But talk about when you may even be returning to work. And then Debra, I'm going to let you close us out, if you will, with the things that you are doing, as well as the stop start as we move back into the workplace. So Jennifer, your organization is looking at a possible return to work when?
So, well, we have a few individuals popping into the office now, and the office is closed to public. A majority, almost all of our workforce is still remote, and we're operating under the assumption that we will be going into next tax season still remote, and that we will probably be working through tax season remotely, just for safety and making sure that
Yep.
Hopefully when a vaccine comes out, that everyone can safely get that vaccine before we return to the office in mass.
Right.
So yeah,
right.
that's April 15th.
All right. Well, and we wish you all healthy and safe and all of those good things. And I know there's loads out there that can help us better understand the kinds of things that we can be doing to ensure that safety of our employees as they start to return to work. Debra, I'm gonna let you be the closer, if you will. So those kinds of things that you've learned, right? As well as you move into this new space and think about remote. And I know many of your employees are already working within the office in a safe environment, kind of the stop starts as well. And then we'll open it up for some questions, because I think there's going to be, you've sprinkled some great opportunity for people to learn and listen and take some action. So Debra, please.
Well, just to cover, the COVID has so many layering effects to people of all ages, and particularly as you're living it live, trying to figure out, or everyone's trying to gather information and figure out what it is. I think one of the impacts, particularly in D&I space, to keep in mind is this disparity of impact of COVID that COVID has had. Specific to Alameda County, the Latinx community experiences over 4 times more cases of COVID than the next racial group. It's a huge disparity. Black and brown people nationally have experienced a disparaging amount of COVID cases, which actually shines a light on the urgency needed around D&I and the work that we're talking about today. And so I think it's just another example illustrating the impacts that inequities have in very real and scary ways. Here's a pandemic. Guess who's getting hit hard? We have to really start to dismantle these systems of race. In terms of, people who are pushed to, okay, go home. Can you work from home? I don't know. Can you? It's another illustrative example. I don't know. Do you have access to the internet? Do you have equipment at home that you can rely on? Do you have a laptop? Do you own those things? And we've seen some reports on school, but it's also true for the workforce that everybody isn't dealing with the same level of opportunities. So the D&I work ends up being really important for a lot of different reasons. We've engaged our employees in a number of ways. As as a local government agency, guess what? We need the infrastructure to work. We still need firefighters to respond. We still need police officers to respond. We still need your water to come out of your faucet when you turn it on. We still need your toilets to flush. We still need all of those things. So we have had employees the whole time, not our entire workforce. So it has been more of a surgical approach on who needs to be here for the imperative infrastructure and who can work from home. For the people who work from home, so we're in a hybrid model even now. We've reduced our density by about 50% in offices. So people are rotating, and it's a combination of being in the office and a combination of being out. So we don't have everybody packed in a small space
At the same time. Yeah, right.
We have, nobody's going to argue that government is the cutting edge of technology users across the board. But man, have we've had to come up quickly. Everybody has. And it was a positive that's come out. I think that government is slow to change in some of those aspects, and there are no alternatives. So get with it. And everybody got on board very quickly. We're actually meeting quite frequently with employees in terms of the engagement in light of things like the George Floyd killing and the unrest about just dissatisfaction about these inequities. You're talking about in the middle of a pandemic and a community like Pleasanton having over 1,000 people showing up shows the desire of some of these inequities to be resolved. That pain carries over to the employees. So we have been encouraging our employees, our supervisors and our managers all along to be face-to-face with video technology, video conferencing on a regular basis. Myself or my team, we meet twice a week. We never used to meet twice a week as a group. One of the meetings is dedicated to the technical aspects of the job and what people are working on and what they need and getting questions answered and getting everyone on the same page. The second is only for how are you doing? How are you doing in your shelter in place? How are you doing in light of all of the events that are going on, particularly with Black Lives Matter movement and all of these things. I mean, after George Floyd, our staff that meeting that we had was incredibly emotional and filled with tears. And people's mental state right now, for a lot of different reasons, are challenged. You're stuck at home. You've got this bombardment of horrific things happening, one after the other. And when you get through one, there's another one there. And it manifests in very real ways. It again emphasizes the need for understanding, common understanding, and being able to talk and relate across difference in total. So in terms of starts and stops, I would say what we'll stop when we're on the other side, and I say that hesitantly because I think it's just whatever we become, whatever we evolve to. On that side, as an agency, we will stop rescheduling things because we can't get all these different people physically to one place in time. And we will continue to get work done because we are leveraging technology to be able to do that. I think that will manifest in starting to provide services in different ways. It has forced a creativity and an innovation born of necessity, right? That we are looking at doing business differently. I think that what we will start doing is taking advantage of all the things we were forced to do, but do them better with time and resources. And I think D&I is going to benefit from that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you, all of you sharing, just your learning. I say it's a bold, all your learnings and what you're experiencing and have been exposed to in your environments, internally to your work and externally, right? That we're all living in as well. The best practices is sharing the tips and tricks. I mean, I think we just, Steve, we just scraped the surface. We didn't even really get into, we talked a little bit about EAP, employee assistance programs and benefits and our health during this time. There's an opportunity to talk more about employee resource groups or focus groups and coming together. I hear some of you are doing listening and learning opportunities and roundtables. However, we could be more formal. I think there's an opportunity for us all come together and share more about that, and even bringing our groups together. That would be a really neat thing to do as well. There's just so much here. So I would offer up that we continue the conversation. This is part one. And so what I'd love to do is open it up now and help you, Steve, if you could help us facilitate, and or Roy, if there's any questions within the chat, or just open it up to the folks for the next 5 minutes or so before we all move forward into our day.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you to our panelists. You're right, we just touched the surface, a lot more we could discuss. I don't see any specific questions in the chat, but anybody want to just raise your hand or unmute yourself and feel free to ask a question while we've got these great folks here with us today. No questions? No?
I'll say some.
Oh, okay, Herb.
Steve, thank you all so much. I think this diversity thing is huge. I know when I was the chair of the board chamber last year, we talked about your 3 big organizations, but we're all small businesses trying to learn how to navigate through this. And I loved what Gus said, diversity is a fact, inclusion is an act.
Yeah.
And that was one of my biggest getaways. And Jennifer, you talked about listening. We have one mouth and 2 ears, and then Lisa and empathy, and Debra with the government trying to learn how to be more efficient. And I'm always in favor of that, especially being on the planning commission. But my one question is, how do we as a community try and push this out into the commissions, the committees, the Lions, the Rotary, the Kiwanis groups, and those kind of things? So how do we as a group try help making this more inclusionary?
I have some suggestions. I think one of the things we could do, and I'd love to have a further conversation and help within the community expand along the 680 corridor, is bringing more people together, hosting a series of conversations. And we have Gustavo who can help us market and put the comms together. But I really do believe that there may not be a lot of discussion right now. People are internalizing, right? It's washing over them. We need to process. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of a ongoing opportunity to continue the conversation and see where it leads. Because I think what you will find with my experience in this space is people will then start to have these aha moments, right, that Gustavo was talking about, as to how can I help? What could we be doing? And then we break into, focus groups of how do we help our community? How do we help our children in the educational system, the health system, the government? And you'll find that it just starts, it's organic, right? It creates a grassroots effort. So taking the lead and just bringing that up today you know, as an opportunity is a start. So I'd be happy to continue that conversation with you as well.
Yeah, Herb, this is you bring up a great point. How, because a lot of people just don't know what's going on, right? We just don't have an idea of, like, I learned something every day. And the one thing to remember is this never ends. Think
Right.
about what it was. Think about the demographics of Pleasanton 20 years ago versus now. Think about our kids. I mean, my son is going to University of Pacific, is 2 doors down. And he's going his freshman year, 2 doors down in his bedroom. And I think we have to look at what impacts are happening to our kids, our community. Remember, there is systemic racism in everything. And I hate using the word racism because people think KKK, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just those biases, those things that we are just see differently. We all see, you know, you could be a Dodger fan, a Giant fan. That's a bias, right? You see it through a certain lens,
Mhm.
right? And so we have to dismantle the systems that have actually created it, so we don't have, so African Americans or people like neurodiversity, folks like that, who have not had those opportunities, but there's so much talent that's untapped, because in the future, you will not succeed as a business if you do not do this, because people will look at you and say, hey, how are they treating their employees? How are they treating, do they have diversity? What is their marketing like? All that stuff is going to matter, because the folks that are kids down the hall are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And they're going to look at this stuff and they're going to say, hey, I don't want to do business with that person. I don't want to have a relationship because they don't have the worldview that I do. So it's really important to really take that into consideration.
Totally agree.
I would also add that it's a big topic, and it
Yeah.
is it's a whole area of study all by itself. So if you're having a hard time navigating, no kidding, you know, I would strongly encourage you to tap subject matter experts to help you understand and to give you that foundational knowledge and tools that you'll need to then carry it forward. There's also an awful lot of great ideas that generate out of collaboration with other organizations and other groups, whether they be nonprofits or whether they be other companies that are also working on similar initiatives. I think that that is just so helpful. It's how we function. I reach out to colleagues all the time about a whole host of issues, and there's an awful lot of brain power that gets generated when you leverage collaboration. So I think that's something also to consider as a practical step for you.
John, does your dog have a question? No.
Mary Ann is teaching this morning, and Hallie needs some attention. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Oh, that's cute. Any other questions? We're just past or we've reached the 8:30 hour, so I'd like to keep us on time, but
I have a quick question.
Yes,
I'm Yvette. So I want to thank the chamber as well as the panel with so much information. It's kind of overwhelming, but also just, you know, hopeful and inspiring. So Valley Care, we're having our first Diversity and Inclusion Council meeting today. I think a lot of the members that were elected all of our thoughts are, how do we create psychological safety so people feel safe to start speaking up?
Yeah.
I would recommend that you have a facilitator start. It's a lot to navigate, and when you're inside the organization, it makes it hard to separate roles.
Yes.
And you go ahead and let that subject matter expert take you down there if that is a possibility for your organization. If it's not, there are tools out there online. GARE was one of the organizations that I mentioned, but it is geared towards local government, but it really can be applied anywhere. So I think that they're really the best thing you can do is hire somebody to come in and get the conversation going for you, so that the focus is coming from and to the subject matter expert, and then getting out of that discomfort of not talking about it and getting used to talking about it will start to build that safety net that I think you're looking for.
And I think Maria, is it Maria? Is that who would ask the question?
Yvette.
Okay, I just wanted to share, I totally agree with Deborah. We also have some resources that we'll be sharing out. Robert Half has put together a race and equality conversation guide as well. For those who, as we talk today, just want to start the conversation about how do you feel, what does this world mean to you, so we can start learning from one another. But I absolutely do agree with Deborah. When we get deeper into, as Gustavo mentioned, the biases, the stereotypes, the microaggressions, the implicit bias, we all have them. And it's just it's our own experiences and exposures. And in agreement with Deborah very much, because it's very hard to separate if your manager's leading in this space. People may not feel safe or want to share or expose themselves. Right? We have our own biases. Me sitting in my office with photos behind me, I have people going, wait, where is that? What do you, that's your home? You know, so people are we just do this naturally. So I would agree, a subject matter expert, we'll have many of those to choose from as well. And I'm sure many of you know people too, I think would be really advantageous to help set the foundation to get yourselves going.
Lisa, I'd like to address, there was a comment in the chat from Rosa Maria, where she says racism is more than just a bias and reducing it is a disservice. And I wholeheartedly agree, Rosa. Racism and unconscious bias pretty much are two different things, right? I mean, racism ties into unconscious bias, but it is so much more. And racism is unfortunately baked into everything in our society, and dismantling that and working through that is going to be a huge task, and we do need to do more than just look at reducing it. We need to recognize it and look at not just reducing it, but evolving from it. We need to recognize our differences and not just sweep them under the rug. We need to be equitable, not equal, but equitable in everything we do, and give folks who maybe have not had a voice. So thank you, Rosa, for pointing that out. It was a really great comment.
Yeah, and I'll just end with, I totally agree. I think when we look at all of this is just shifting, it's a growth mindset. Right? We need to adopt really shifting and being open and being okay with, we've all said it, the uncomfortable. And that's not easy. It is an evolution. So thank you very much, all of you, Deborah, Gustavo, Jennifer, and those that have asked those questions, Steve and others. Thank you so much. And I appreciate being asked to moderate such a great conversation. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lise, and thank you, panelists. Thank you, Robert Half. Thanks, Roy, for all your work putting this together. This is just the beginning. As mentioned earlier, we planned, I hope, I'm going to get a page put together on our website that talks about race and equality resources, and all the websites we've got here and others I've already received. We hope to get those on there. And there was a comment in the chat about a list of facilitators that may be able to help companies with this process. So I think that'd be great to share as well. So just can't thank you enough. Obviously, we've got a lot more to talk about, and hopefully we can bring this back at another time and continue the conversation. Thank you for your support of the chamber, and I'm going to close things out and appreciate your engagement today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.